10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Good luck, studio.
Oh, it's that time again. Paul Chandler's gonna start this whole thing he does. It's called the Charlotte Podcast. It's probably gonna start any minute now. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, sit back and relax.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
It's the quiet ones you've got to watch, you know.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Good boy. He's not all that shy, is right. Gee.
Blimey, Governor. It's the Shy Life Podcast.
Excellent.
584.
Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. I got to be back. It's a bit dark in the room where I'm sitting. I'm not quite sure what's gone on with the light, but still getting a little bit spooky, a little bit scary. But I'm hoping my special guests, I got two of them, I'm hoping that they'll be arriving soon. But anyway, let's run the theme music. When we come back, hopefully we'll shed some light on who the guests are, and also some light on me so I can see them. But anyway, run that theme music.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Yes, but it's a positive thing, Paul. The highlight, the Shy Life.
You won't find a cast of characters like this everywhere.
Hello, Paul.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, captors. How are you?
You quite like a big fan, don't you?
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh my, he hasn't found out my secret. I think he has.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Oh, I can't wait for it to begin.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
Yeah, I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
But has the Shy Life Podcast slowed down? I don't think so.
It's all gooey and meaty and yum.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
Oh, listeners, it's kind of creepy in here. I can hear something. What is that? Oh, hello?
Oh, boo, hi, Paul.
Oh, it's you, Toppy. You're there. I can't find the light switch. I don't know what's going on.
Spooky here, it's spooky.
Who's that? Where's our other guest? Hello, other guest. Are you there? Oh, Nick. It's Nick.
Coming out of the wardrobe.
Nick's been hiding in the.
No,
in the
putting your
wardrobe.
tapes away.
Oh, is it? Oh, just the. There we go. There's the light switch. Oh, that's much better. Oh my goodness! Now I'm going to turn it off again. Oh no, I can see you both now. It's good.
That's really scary.
Yeah. Oh dear. How are we? How are we doing?
I'm all right.
Yeah, I'm good. I went to see. As I say, I've come to one of my. We're here at your parents' house, which
Yes.
can be quite creepy at times, as you know, out in the country, all cut off. And I've just done some housekeeping on your old camcorder tapes. So they're now all safely in order in the cupboard there. And I went to see my family recently and got to meet my brand new great niece, Charlotte, who's very sweet.
So not too scary then.
Not too scary, no. I haven't had a particularly scary time, though. I'm just about to go on holiday to Scotland.
Oh well. We might see a Loch Ness monster or a scary drummer with a no head or something, like a ghost.
Well, you won't see me, will you?
Well, I thought we'd at least start off by talking about things that scared us as children, whether it be or even as adults, whether it be like in real life, on TV, whether it be books we read. I'm never sure that I've ever. Sometimes they say that, like reading a scary ghost story around a fire, or I don't know that I've ever read anything that has scared me in the way that if you're watching a TV show or a film and there's something gruesome coming up, you might look away or pretend you've been distracted by something. I'm not sure I've ever been that affected by anything I've read, but I might be wrong. It's a funny thing. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with scary things. I do kind of love them, but I also kind of scared. I'm sort of scared about being scared. It's pushing yourself in front of the headlights of the scariness.
Yeah.
And actually,
do you think that's why you like horror so much? Is that there's that need to be scared, but also that fear of being scared?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've said before about how when I was at university, I used to watch scary movies, but I would whiz them through on the videotape first to get to the scary bits. So, and then I go back to the start and watch. Okay, I know 30 minutes. I know after this bit there's a scary bit, but I've seen it already, and it'll be fine. And this bit, and I'd prepare myself. I'd cheat basically. You couldn't have done that in the cinema. You couldn't say, "Can you just whiz it through so I can see where the scary bits are?" But Toppy, what are the earliest things you remember being scared about? And did you always like scare, or were you a nervous person who liked scary things? Or
well, I think this may sound strange, but I was quite a fearful child. Yeah. I feel like I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of abandonment. Like if I was home and I thought, oh, where's my mother? And if I didn't immediately see her or find her, I immediately thought, oh, I've been abandoned. Or if she left me in a car to run into a grocery store, I would immediately think, well, she's never coming back. I don't know why, but I was. And I was afraid of things like if it rained hard, and I lived in a city at the time, and the gutters would fill with rushing water, I was certain that it was going to flood and that it would soon be over my head. And so that's the kind of irrational fears, I don't know why I had, but I had them. But oddly enough, at that same exact age, when I was looking out the window at the water and fearing it was going to flood, I was watching Dark Shadows, which scared me. And I remember palpably feeling in my stomach the fear, but somehow it was entertaining, and I don't know what, but for the next 5 years I watched it as a kid, and that was a half-hour long soap. It was on Monday through Friday, so that's a hell of a lot of episodes, although not quite as much as Sutton Park. So that's a little inexplicable to me, that I was a fearful child but was entertained by something scary. And Dark Shadows set me up to love horror movies and monster movies and science fiction movies and that genre. And I grew up reading Stephen King and reading his books. They were scary, but I loved it. And even as I was older, now for whatever reason, I'm not like this today. I used to be terrified of lightning. I was afraid it was going to strike me. So fear. Lightning, I don't care. Whatever it was going to get me somehow. And there was when I moved, my family moved to Pickle Hollow, which is where my parents both grew up. My grandmother's house was around the corner from my parents' house, and but there was sort of a back way to get between them, but you had to go through these woods. And I would often be up visiting my grandmother and then have to go back home through these woods, and it would be pitch black night. Well, okay, now we're talking more like 15, 16, 17, still this ridiculously fearful person, and I never walked through those woods. I ran like hell. Why? Because Bigfoot's out there. No, really. I really thought I was afraid of Bigfoot, and also the stars were really out, and I was afraid of aliens. totally irrational, but I really was. I never walked through those woods. I tore through them. So somewhere along the line between now and then, I stopped having those kinds of fears. I couldn't even tell you when or why, but I don't run through dark woods anymore, and I'm not fearful of lightning. So yeah, there you go. Weird, but I still love horror movies.
There's a road that Nick walked down it today on the way to my parents' house, but it's during the day, so it's not a problem. But when I used to come home from school, I think the road is even more overgrown now. I mean, the road isn't overgrown, but the hedges are really high, and you get to a point where they've kind of met in the middle over the road. And I think there probably were times when I used to walk back from school that I used to get the bus, and then you have this mile or 3/4 mile or something walk back down to my parents' house down this scary road, unless a car was coming. Of course, I guess from about October onwards until sort of March or whatever, it would be dark at the time I was coming home, and I think I kind of enjoy being in the dark on that case, but it could have been potentially sort of scary. And you must have walked down there in the.
I have, yeah. I mean, I think the times I've walked down actually in the dark down there. Obviously, it's been in my 20s, but and onwards. But I seem to recall coming back from there with the likes of you and Robin and
after the pub or something. After
the pub. And we've had a few, and it's actually quite relaxing going down there. But I have to say, with dark, I was afraid of the dark as a kid, and particularly in our house where there was 3 levels, and you had to go down the staircase. I've since been redesigned. I had the pleasure of actually going in there after 40 years and seeing what it's like now. And they've got the loos in sensible places now, but back then you had to go down 1 level to go to the loo. And I was afraid of walking through the living room, which was on level 2, in the dark. And in fact, I had a nightmare that at the bottom of the stairs there was my sister, but it wasn't my sister. It was a kind of malignant version of my sister. And I got the sort of scary vibes, and also in that we had on the bottom level we had a long hallway with the door in the semi-darkness, and I was always kind of used to give me the heebie-jeebies. I think a long dark corridor. They do have a certain something, because I remember in my infant school my very butch headmistress redid the whole school cloakroom and turned it into a library, and she left this gap to put all the chairs in so they could be stacked in, and right at the back in the dark you could see this hook, which was all that was left of the cloakroom, and it was kind of like this rather chilling reminder of what it had been before. I can't really, there's no real sensible way of putting it, but it was like this is haunts, that it was the ghost of the cloakroom kind of leering at me down through this dark passage. And that was quite chilling. But like, I have to say, Toppy, like yourself, I was an extremely nervous child. It would be quicker to say what I wasn't afraid of, I think. But one of my earliest memories of being frightened is the one thing that I've adored most of my life, and that's being in the company of girls. And it was actually in the very room that Paul and I met about 16 years later. In the Montessori school. I don't know what I was doing there. It was some kind of daycare, and these two, the local school that my sister went to, St Edmunds, there was 2 St Edmunds girls looking after me, and for some reason I remember being scared of them. I don't know why. I don't remember them particularly terrorising me or anything, but I remember it being a scary memory. There was also staying with school there. One of the more quirky things I was afraid of when I was a kid was urinals. Because I'd never seen one before. When I started school in 1973, I'd only been to a kind of like going to the cubicle type loo or the loos at home, and here was this thing which was this porcelain trough, and okay, and nobody actually said, oh, by the way, don't be alarmed, but once in a while they will go at you and hiss and it's such an aggressive sound. And of course, I wasn't prepared for this. So you're in the middle of your functions, and this thing would hiss malevolently at you, and you zip it up and run for your life. And for a while, nobody ever called them urinals when I was a kid, so I used to call them buzz machines. And I had this character at the time who was just my finger hooked like that, going, and there was Mousy, and my friend Jonathan and I had this character called Mousy, and we created the buzz machines as a sort of opponent for Mousy. So Mousy and the Buzz Machine sounds like a sort of 60s pop group, but sure enough, we would chase each other around. I would persuade my friends to chase us around the playground, being urinals, and for a while, urinals were the enemy. I kind of was afraid of their buzz because they had a grudge against mankind. As a postscript to that, I'm on the PCC committee now, which hires out that school, which is now the church hall. And I was at a function years ago, and I had a little wander down the corridors where I went in the 70s, and I think it was still a school at that point, actually, come to think of it. I found the kids' toilets, and it didn't occur to me at the time, but it was like a doll's house. They were actually visibly shrunken rather than a normal size ones. To me, they were normal size because I was only equal. But it didn't occur to me that they were actually considerably smaller than the adult versions. So it was like sort of having a pee in a doll's house. So, but yeah.
Don't advise. I don't think they won't be very happy with you if you do that.
And darkness, I for some reason, because I was a very weird kid as well as a very nervous one, I manifested darkness and fear of darkness of these 100-foot high hairy creatures called weirdos or weirdies, or I can't remember what they were called. But I remember my sister trying to persuade me to go to bed. I said, but I've got these creatures. It's called weirdy. They'll get me if the lights are out. And she turned around to these imaginary foes and said, "Now look, you da 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 da, waggy fingers." And I said to her, "They're 100 foot high." And so she looks at the ceiling and waggles her finger at the ceiling. "Now look, you." Da, da, da. So it was weird because I haven't thought of things like that for years. But the actual fear that brings out. But yeah, lightning, I don't think that's that isn't an irrational fear. I mean, I like a good thunderstorm, but I always think, please don't let there be lightning when I'm walking to work. So I suppose these days I still have a slight fear of lightning, but it's a very cautious, practical one. Because it might get you never know.
Where I live, where I live. The child in this village where we're recording now, there were hills one side. They're not like really high hills, but there are hills in front of me as I'm looking out, and hills behind me, where there's woods and a river, and my relationship with the two sides of hills was completely different because I was always excited to go across the fields and cross the river on the bridge and go up to the woods, and then I later often used that as a filming location. And I also found there was a railway line that was an abandoned railway line that it could have been used as a nice place to walk, but it was almost used like a boundary by farmers between fields. But whether or not I was supposed to or not, I used to went through a stage of getting down onto it and then using it for locations for Sutton Park later on. And I think eventually it got quite grown over and I couldn't use it. But and if you kept walking, you got to a place called Pepperbox Hill, which is a location that Nick and I used for a number of things, including the Sutton Park film in '93. But so that side of the village, or those hills, is all quite welcome and quite exciting to explore. But the hills I'm looking at from here, there's a mound of it's just very spooky. That side. There's a mound of trees called Clearbury, and I think
is that Clearbury? I didn't know.
Over there is Clearbury, and and that has a certain. I think that has some sort of ancient thing because it's got a sort of ring around. You can walk around the trees and then you can walk in. And so I think it probably was some sort of fort or something at one point. But I also used to cycle up because it's just field after field and track after track, and it's probably more farming. But I think you're allowed to sort of walk there, but there's nothing up there other than fields and fields and fields, and maybe the occasional mound of trees that you can go and walk around. But I always got a really spooky feeling up there. Going back to when I was a child and my gran and my great aunt took me for a walk up there, and I remember feeling I don't like it out here, I want to go back. And I still felt a bit like that when I used to go sometimes and cycle up that way or explore. You just felt really cut off. You felt like you were kind of partly felt like maybe you were being watched. You kind of felt that you were completely on your own. And I also told a story not so long ago about there is a place called the Miz Maze, which is a bit further along, but it's also up that side, up those hills, and it's a maze that's been sort of chalk and grass that's been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And there are stories I've looked on. I always felt a little bit creeped out when I went there. And when you go because the maze is inside a ring of trees, so once you go enter that area, you're already out in the middle of nowhere up on a hill. But then you're suddenly in a circle of trees with this strange maze. And it's not like a maze it's not like a deep maze. It's like you follow it around, but it's not like even above your knee level or anything. But I remember definitely feeling sort of creeped out a bit, and I think I did do some Sutton Park up there, sometimes with friends, sometimes without, and I definitely remember, again, getting that strange sort of feeling of being really cut off. And I've since found there are ghost stories about the maze. People on forums have written about having strange experiences up there, which, whether it's true or not, it certainly, there's something certainly about that place that makes people think they've seen things. Whether they have or not is another matter. But it's very, very sort of. Is there anywhere near where you live, Toppy, which you'd say was a place that gives you creeps, whether it be a house or a wood or a place by the lake or?
Good question. Certainly that. Absolutely the patch of woods between my grandmother's house and my parents' house.
Yeah.
But let's see now. The only other place I can think of that gave me the willies was my grandparents' basement, which was, an unfinished basement where my grandfather kept his tools and his tool bench and yada yada. And for some reason, that always, it was always lit by a single light bulb. And you didn't, it was just a creepy place. Outside, I can't think of anything that gave me the creeps now.
I was thinking when I went to Portland and stayed there, I was driven out into the sort of countryside outside of Portland, and we went and visited somebody, a friend of the family, who owned a log cabin somewhere in the middle of the woods, away from the main road. It wasn't that deep into them, and it was quite interesting to visit it in the daylight. But I don't know I'd have been so happy if I was living, because these people, they lived in there as a holiday home, but it wasn't like that there was as far as I was aware, there was no lake 2 minutes. You know, there was no sort of. It was just a place to sleep in the middle of these woods. It wasn't, and perhaps there were other cabins dotted around, but it wasn't like you could just walk out on the veranda and see a nice lake or a nice view. You could just see trees after trees after trees, and I can imagine that. Staying there, you know, if it was a bit of a storm, you really would feel like you were in a Friday the 13th movie or something.
It's uncanny. You were saying, Toppy, about your grandfather's cellar. I too, that was one of my fears as well. My granddad died in 1974 when I was 5, going on 6, and during the sort of, we used to go there every Easter, and it was a lovely old, I presume, Victorian house with several levels and stained glass, and always smelled of polish. And there was this cellar, and it was, whenever I used to look inside, it was pitch dark. I think it was a bit of a rickety staircase, and I would always be too scared to go down. And when he died, we had one last Easter at their house, whilst we were sorting things out, because I think he died about the month before Easter, and I realised then at the age of 5 that this was going to be the last time I'd see the house, and it's now or never. So I actually, with the aid of Mum, we went down into the cellar, and like you say, it was, we had there were tools, very much all very carpentry orientated, and he had these little kind of passages, little tiny passages with these seed trays, plastic seed trays, and they were all marked in Roman numerals. I don't know. We'll never know why, but he did everything in Roman numerals. But yeah, that was a cellar fear I had to face up to.
It's funny when sometimes when I've been out and about, not necessarily back in the day when I was doing sometimes I suppose when I was doing something part, you'd just be walking through the woods and maybe you'd see I never encountered anything that was like the people putting the things up, but perhaps you're walking through a glade and there'd be strange little things attached to the little, not quite Blair Witch level, but maybe little sort of shiny things or bauble-y things, and it obviously meant something, or may have been a message to people who are travelling, or sometimes you hear about that. It's kind of intriguing, but also kind of, when you see things out of place attached to trees, you think, is there been a black mass here, or the opposite of a black mass? I was only a year ago. I was did a walk from one of the stations near me to my house, and just past this tree, and it had been draped in all sorts of colourful baubles and beads and little bits of writing on wood, and I just don't know why. It wasn't in a place where it was
somewhere too tight for a Christmas tree.
Well, it wasn't anywhere that anyone would be. It wasn't like it was in the central area. It was just a tree on a pathway, and I could only think it meant something to somebody and was a message or was a tribute to somebody, but because it's unexplained and you don't know the background to it, it automatically makes you feel a little bit, ooh, that's sort of... I mean, sometimes when I used to do Sutton Park, if I'd come across something like that, I would immediately sort of go, oh, this is where... this must be where some baddie of Sutton Park was doing some sort of hideous black mass or something. But it's a good thing nobody suddenly, like, people didn't suddenly come out of the woods and go, you're going to be our sacrifice. But you can sort of almost scare yourself because the unknown is, you just can't understand why something which could be perfectly innocent if it was explained to you. I think I have been in woods where, for some reason, people have decorated a random Christmas tree in the middle of a forest, and you think, well, it's something like, but it's a strange thing to do, I guess, or is it? Maybe it wasn't on the day. Maybe there was lots of locals singing carols and it was lovely, or it was for a photo shoot, or it was. But now, out of context, it has a certain strange, sinister edge to it. But I mean, it doesn't help being a imaginative person anyway. You tend to think of, or my mind goes to, oh, there must be something really, aliens must have been here. Or, but
I know that for myself, watching monster movies and what have you, I always understood that they weren't real and that I was watching someone in makeup or whatever. I always understood that. Okay, the things that got me were reports or stories that were purported to be true. And there was this infamous book published in America called something like Amazing True Stories or something like that. It was a little paperback book, and it gave a lot of people nightmares, and I was one of them. And it was a bunch of stories across the last 200 years or whatever that were purported to be true. So here's the story that got me, that just got me. Some farmer somewhere in the U.S. was walking across his field going home, and his wife happened to be on the porch of their house and saw him approaching. And then suddenly he wasn't there. So she ran out, took her kid, one of her two children came out, "Where's Daddy?" And they looked around and around and around and couldn't find him, except every once in a while they'd hear his voice. Okay? So they said, well, there's a hole. There must be a hole. He fell into a hole. No holes. They looked and looked and looked. The villagers looked and looked and looked. Never saw him again. And supposedly, this was a true story. Okay? All right. I was convinced that I was going to suddenly disappear one day, especially running through that damn forest. I swear, things that were reported to be true, like Bigfoot, and there was that famous footage of Bigfoot that everyone's seen a million times, and it apparently was true, those are the things that get me.
That was Yeti Uncle John's friend David.
No, I was going to say, if I met Bigfoot, I'd get the $6 Million Man DVD signed.
There's a book by Whitney Strieber, who previously wrote scary books like Wolfen and some others, and then he wrote a book that he said was true, and it was called Communion. And the story was about how over the years he's been visited by aliens. Well, this is a guy who spent his life writing books about strange things and then writes one that he says is true. So it's all very dubious. But the fact that it was true, that damn book haunted me with the descriptions of the visits and things. And for a couple of years I was looking out for little alien heads peeking out over the bed or something. And I was pretty old. I was like 25 when I read that stupid book.
I had a book about supposed alien sightings in the UK, and there was one that was in our county in Wiltshire, and the village name was almost the same as ours, except our village is called Charlton All Saints, and it was just called Charlton, and I wasn't sure which we never called this, it would always be so I thought, well, it's probably, as much as I would like it to be, it probably isn't. It's probably another Charlton in this county, and it was about I think it was about maybe crop circle. I'm not sure if it was crop circles, because we had a lot of that over here where there were crop circles appearing in fields, and what was it? People faking it? Was it real? Was it? But this book was older than that. That sort of fad for that was more like 90s or whatever. Where this book was older than that, and because of the scary hills, I could well imagine a UFO. It's really creepy up there. That would be perfect for some alien. But I was quite sort of fascinated, wanting to know more. Of course, it was in the time when you didn't have Wikipedia and things. what was in the book was about all I was going to find, sort of thing. Not a story of my own, but Toby's told me about how he grew up in a house where it was maybe a three-story house, and it had one of those sorts of lights where you press the light at the bottom of the stairs, and then it slowly retracts, and because it turns itself off, but you've got a few minutes to get up to the. And maybe there were two of these, but the one in the middle stopped working. So you get halfway up, and their bedroom, he and his sister's bedroom, was at the top of the house. You get halfway up, and then it would plunge into darkness, and you'd have to do the last bit of the stairs in the dark. And they always felt that somebody was watching them. And I think later they found, or maybe even when they were still there, they found there was a story of somebody like dying in that house, or dying sort of not very pleasantly. Toby's not the sort of person necessarily he's interested in ghost stories, but I wouldn't say he necessarily, a bit like me, I mean.
I was, when in the late 70s, we moved across town to an older house when we moved to Harnham, and I suppose I was interested in this new house, but I was a little bit nervous of it because, it was an unknown quantity. And the usual thing, getting up in the middle of the night was always a bit of a... and the light, with the bathroom, I remember seeing this shape in the bathroom, which I was convinced was a ghost. And I rushed back into my room and put the duvet in my cover and everything. And of course, I in my imagination, I suppose, I built this up quite long. I saw a ghost in the bathroom, and I told my friend Andrew Cook, who was interested in the paranormal and ghosts and supernatural, and I remember a year later, exactly to the day, he stayed over, and because he read too many Enid Blyton and Famous Five, and seen too many episodes of Scooby-Doo, he was very wanting to see it himself, and I think we just gave each other a spooky night, where we had nightmares and things like that, because we built this thing up, and I built this thing up. But I remember him and I having a conversation about sort of weird things that we'd experienced or perceived we'd experienced, and I remember saying to him at one point, in the middle of the night I hear this. And he said, "That's just the central heating going on." Oh, right.
Yeah, when I worked at the college, that was the sort of building, you can imagine there being ghosts of housemaids who'd fallen downstairs or whatever. But I'd even go into the library podcasting studios and turn the lights off and kind of think, I'll just sit here and and I always kind of thought, if a ghost comes in, then I won't be scared. I'll just be like, "Hi, how you doing?" Or if they try and be scary, I'll just go, "Hey, behave yourself." But nothing happened ever. Of course, I think if just because the building looks like it would have a ghost, if you want it too much, it's not going to happen. But I do remember we had a graphics officer who did all like graphics for presentations and things, and there was a photo of some either students or staff on the stairs, and that he could see, because sometimes you hear about like in pictures where people think they've seen ghosts or they think they photographed ghosts. There's like balls of energy or balls of and he was like, "I've got a picture of a ghost," and and when I looked at it, for somebody who obviously I'd done Sutton Park, and I knew about how you can get bits of crisp stuck behind the lens or whatever, I was always getting, because I probably use my video camera bag to store snacks sometimes, and sometimes for years there was a bit of crisp.
Right through Prison in the Sun.
Yes.
This faithful crisp follows us wherever we go.
It stayed there. It looked like if you zoomed in, it looked like a UFO going across the screen. I looked at this picture that this guy said that he found, and to me it just looked like how when the light catches something, didn't look anything like that. I thought somebody who is involved in graphics, you think you would know a bit of fluff on the lens or something. It was a bit ridiculous, but
yeah, the number of supposed spirit photos that are basically illuminated dust, a piece of thing that's floating. It's so obvious, and yet so many people are just absolutely positive it's a spirit ball, or what, I don't know what they call them, a ghost lighter. And it's like, you look at them, it's like, no, it's so not. It's like, it seems obviously. I used to be a complete skeptic, and I was convinced, no Bigfoot, no aliens, no spooks, no ghosts. No, absolutely not. And I was convinced that everything that people had seen could be explained. And the biggest explanation of all was the human mind that loves to make connections and basically build its own stories. And it's not anything people are doing deliberately. It's just that your brain plays tricks on you, and it can seem incredibly real. For example, I recently got up and there was a full moon, and outside this is total darkness except for moonlight, and there was this, what I thought was a dog, way out on the lawn, some distance away from the window. And I just stood there and looked at it because I said, it's a dog, but what's he doing? And the dog was like moving its head and turning around and putting its snout in the air. And the more I watched it, the more I realized, oh, this is my eyes doing that thing that eyes do. And it's a well-known phenomenon. You have involuntary muscle movement of your eyes that happens particularly when there's just a little bit of light, or sometimes it happens when there's a lot of light. And I said, I know what's going on here. I know exactly what's going on. But I stayed and watched it for another minute because it looked so real. Even though I consciously knew what was happening, I said, God damn, that looks like a dog that's moving. Of course, in the morning, I looked out again, and it was a tree stump. But that's an example of how so convincing. By the way, what I just told you is why there's so many stories from Catholics and other religious people who swear they're looking up on a hill at a statue of the Virgin Mary and it's moving. And soon there's lots of people that see it. Well, it's a white statue up on a hill some distance away with a spotlight shining on it, and if you look at it long enough, it's going to move, because that's what happens to your eye. It's when you look at a star up in the sky and you stare at it and you swear it's moving. It's not moving. Yeah. It's your eyes. So I'll just finish by saying, for years I've been like the most skeptic ever. More recently, I've decided, you know what, Toppy, you don't know shit. And get over yourself. And now I'm more inclined to keep my skepticism, but also allow, there are weird things out there. And I don't know all the answers, whereas I used to think, oh yeah, I know the answer. I don't know all the answers. So I'm not the skeptic I was, but I carry the skepticism in my back pocket, and I'll look pretty hard at things before I can be convinced that, okay, you're right, this is unexplainable.
I something like that happened to me with Callum in Dunbar in Scotland. During the time that we've been doing the podcast, our bedroom looked out over the shoreline, and I called out to Callum, I think there's some seals, because there are seals in Dunbar, and you've seen them in the harbour, and I think we both looked and thought they were there, and I tried to zoom in and I still couldn't get and then a little bit while later I looked back and I was like, I know they weren't seals, they were because they looked like they were moving. It was the tide lapping on some rocks that were slowly being uncovered by the water, and looking back half an hour later, you could see that there was even more of them, and they were just rocks. Perhaps if it had gone the other way and the tide was coming in and had gone over them, I'd look back and they'd have been gone. But it was rocks in this case. But I do have a funny relationship with. I do like to play with the toys of sort of scary toys, but I don't necessarily play with them in like a scary way. A lot of my things I've written have been playing around with the conventions of werewolves, or even going back to Sutton Park, going back to some of my series I've written. In fact, one series I wrote had like a werewolf, a mummy, various different characters. Some of them were characters from Sutton Park, all living in a house. I wrote a couple of seasons of that, and then the BBC did a show called Being Human, which was very similar, at least in that there were ghosts and a vampire or whatever, all living in the same house, and they did it. There was sort of funny lines, but it was a lot more serious than what I've written. But I was never intending to send my show to try and get it commissioned anyway. But I was still a bit sort of. I suppose I thought, well, I guess that confirms that it was something that had that could have worked, because it worked. It worked. The Being Human version worked for 3 or 4 years. But I also don't. What I don't like when I do. I think the reason I think it's just easier to be silly with these things than it is to be. I don't know that I think if you're trying to think of new things to do with vampires or werewolves, I hate all the stuff that's set up for them. Like I always made sure that I was like, well, no, vampires, they can go outside now. They wear glasses, or they've evolved to this level. Or werewolves don't always have to wait. It's not just full moons. I used to like making my own rules up, because by that point I was just fed up of, this is the trouble about watching. When Dark Shadows was new, nobody knew that there was a vampire in the show. Anybody who has watched it since, arts in repeats or since, knows that Dark Shadows is partly about a vampire. It must have been completely shocking to be watching it originally, and then to realise this guy is a vampire without, and back in those days you wouldn't have had TV newspapers that gave away the twists of things before. There wouldn't be so much previewing things. It would have been a real surprise. And but on the other hand, if I see a film that's got a vampire in it, I'm kind of like, how much time is going to be wasted with all of the, oh, is he a vampire? Oh, there's so much. I want to get to the new port. I mean, that's the good thing about Dark Shadows, is that it gets past. It starts off with all the tip. If you're rewatching it now, it gets past all the typical vampire cliches to some new areas. I don't think I'd ever seen. I don't think when I first saw Dark Shadows, because this was before Angel, I don't think I'd ever seen a vampire thing where somebody's trying to cure a vampire, like which may have happened in vampire fiction, and I just wasn't aware of it. But to me, that was quite that we were moving on to a bit of the story that was new, or having a vampire that wanted to be human again, or
I don't know for absolute sure, but I do think the character of Barnabas Collins on Dark Shadows may be fiction's first reluctant vampire. I think that's quite possible.
I was always like, getting to the bits past all that, because you can, I mean. The first Dark Shadows movie, although it's nice to see everybody in great quality, nice filmic quality, and it's basically like any other Hammer film you've seen to that point, where it's a vampire. You know everything there's no real surprises. It's sort of going back to basics, really. And
I agree. It really does have a Hammer feel. But it was totally not a Hammer movie, but it sure looks like one. So the cliches of, I think
some of the scariest things, the things that scare me more, or like things I almost avoid, are when it's almost too real. Like there was a show, I think I'm going to forget the name, but Nick might remember. What was the name of the film, the series about rabies?
Oh, Mad Death. Mad Death. Yes.
Yeah. I was young. I saw it was just basically about like some dogs or animals with rabies biting people, and how it would I mean, I've never watched it, so I'm making up a bit. But I'm guessing it's about what would happen if rabies got into.
I think it's out there. I think it's.
Yeah, I just don't want to watch it though. It's because it's a real thing. I have more problems with real things or things that are potentially.
Would you say the same about Threads?
Yeah, I don't want to watch Threads. That's about nuclear war topic. I don't want to watch that. I watched the cartoon. Raymond Briggs, who did the Snowman and Fungus the Bogeyman and various other animations, did When the Wind Blows, and that's a cartoon about a Holocaust and about these two old people living in a house, and I don't want to see that ever again either, because it was somehow. I think it was somehow more disturbing because it was. I don't know if it's because it was even though they were a cartoon, the old woman was really confused and it was just horrible.
The worst thing was, I think with that one was Raymond Briggs reused a character that he'd done before with Gentleman Jim, who I think was a toilet cleaner or something like that. He was a kind of an old-fashioned gent who did. I've got a feeling he cleaned the gents or something like that. And so he was a reoccurring character. So you'd actually got to know this character in the previous book. And Raymond Briggs was getting him off in this nuclear holocaust.
I mean, I think
it's a bit dark.
I think also when I was young, I was scared of the TV adaptation of Day of the Triffids, and I think it was almost the Triffids were quite scary in that version. But the first episode, it's from the point of view of the guy who's gone blind and he's in the hospital, and slowly he's realising things are, and you get flashbacks to his association with the Triffids, and it's just very, very atmospheric because the hospital's empty, and I don't think I never got past episode 1 when I was a kid because I was too scared. My mum said, "Do not watch any more of that."
We rewatched it a few months ago, and it's a cracking piece of atmospheric telly. Even now, over 40 years on, and particularly as Paul said, that first episode, because you've got the blind chap and there is nobody else about, and he realises there's a slow realisation that there's nobody going to be around to take his bandages off.
I mean, I was scared of. I remember being scared of the Incredible Hulk. I remember looking through. Nick will know on the way up to what he may not know. One thing about this: as you go up the stairs in my parents' house, these wooden stairs, you go past a window that looks into a room, like a day room or whatever. But I don't know if Nick's ever thought, why is there a window on the staircase looking into a room?
I have over the last 33 years.
but because the day room was built later, and that was originally a window that looked out onto the garden. Before that room was, they really built that room partly when my brother came along because it gave us an extra room to spread out into, and it just took a bit. It just encroached on a bit of the garden, sort of claimed a bit of the garden, but the window's still there. But I guess I wonder if my memory's cheating, because I would have thought that this watching Incredible Hulk would have been before that happened. But anyway, maybe I was looking around the door, maybe I'm remembering things wrong. But I remember sort of peeping through the doorway, and I think the Incredible Hulk or Bruce Banner had been locked in a chest, and then he got crossed and came out as the. But I don't think I really understood about the Incredible Hulk. Wasn't necessarily a threat to me. I think he was just. He was actually a sympathetic character, but I think I just found it quite scary. I was scared of the title sequence of the 60s Batman, I mean, once you get past that, it's not a scary program at all. But that title sequence was very scary.
I think the title sequence, if well done, can be. I mean, there's Survivors, the '70s version of the Survivors TV series. The ominous music and the Oriental scientist reaching out for, particularly as because it was like an experimental thing, and the experiment goes wrong and wipes out 95% of the world's population, and that title set it up so vividly that I was quite disturbed. And as Paul said about I couldn't get past the title sequence. And my only other memories of the Survivors is lots of fields, people in lots of fields. It wasn't a particularly scary episode, but you had to get past the titles. And also, my mum wore horn rim. This scientist person was wearing horn rim specs, and my mum used horn rim specs. And shot behind this polythene, it looked like someone was suffocating my mum. So it was it was scary. Very scary title sequence.
I was thinking about when we were kids, like for me, when Tom Baker was Doctor Who, the title sequence with the TARDIS going down the sort of time tunnel type thing, that was pretty scary. And I imagine if I'd have been around, like when William Hartnell or Patrick Troughton, that was quite scary. I think after I think I was watching Tom Baker for only about a year when that title sequence was still being used. The title sequence that followed it was more of a star system. I wouldn't say that was scary, but for a long period in the 70s there was that title sequence was used. It's certainly with the music as well. I don't since Doctor Who's come back, I don't think there's been a single title sequence that I've been particularly happy with. I think they've been very creative, very sort of using all sorts of, but I don't think they're particularly atmospheric. Too much use of red in a lot of the title sequences.
I do quite like the first one. I think the trouble is, I think they spent too long fiddling with it, and they when it came back with Eccleston, for my money, they got music right. It would have been nice to see a face or so, but I think that wasn't too bad. But I think then they fiddle around with music and fiddle on the titles, and it all.
I don't think I've ever been.
It was an over-egged pudding.
Nothing's ever bettered the 70s time tunnel one.
No, I'd agree with that. That's the business for me.
I mean, it's not really quite scary, but one of the few title sequences, or including the music, that I've seen recently that I've been very impressed with. I can't remember if you watched this as well, Toppy. The Only Murders in the Building. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet.
No, but I think you'll like the title sequence. It's very beautiful, and I think the music is very good as well. It's like an animated title sequence, but it's very well done, and the music is just one of the best theme tunes for any TV series. I don't know why I like it so much, but I do. That sort of falls into, I guess, comedy drama, but it's with scary bits. It reminds me a bit of Manhattan Murder Mystery, where you've got one of my favourite Woody Allen films, where you've got sort of older characters muddling through trying to solve a murder, and you've got sort of not scary, but you've got tension where they're trying to find out something, or they've broken into a flat to try and get something, and you know that the person might be turning up in them. I do quite like that sort of scary, the sort of fun scary, where you sort of, you think you're watching a comedy, but suddenly you're, quick, get out of the room, oh, they're going to get caught. That sort of thing does appeal to me. It's sort of a different end of the scary spectrum. But
to go back to the real versus fiction, the real, seemingly real or purportedly real things being scarier than fiction. There was a strange 3, maybe 4 year period, I'd say roughly 1977 to 1980, when a lot of things happened that were pretty damn scary, and a lot of them were things that I never realized could happen. Like, it never crossed my mind, and there was a whole series of them. And the first one was the Son of Sam murders in New York City, where I just didn't know people went around randomly killing people. I just didn't know it happened. And that was, I would read the newspaper accounts, and that scared the hell out of me. Later on, there was the Jim Jones cult in Guyana. Never knew what a cult was, and they all committed suicide. Never knew this was a thing or could ever happen, but there it was in the newspaper. Scared the hell out of me. The next thing that happened was Mount St. Helens blew. Well, I never knew about it could blow up like that. Scared the hell out of me. And then finally, 3 Mile Island had a near meltdown. And that's in Pennsylvania, and it was close by. And again, it's like, holy Jesus, this is a freaking scary world out here, and I never knew any of these things could ever happen. And finally, the last one that happened, that I just, just continued this thing about me being a fearful person, living their life in fear of what's going to happen, was AIDS. Right when I was coming out to myself and barely beginning my sexual history, boom, there's this thing that's killing everyone. And that scared the hell out of me for the next 8-10 years. Yeah. So it's really weird to me. Those are the things that happened that were truly scary. Like, just... And it just feels like there was always something. And especially those first 4 incidents came so close together, and they were so like, I just didn't know. I just didn't know these things happened.
Even with me, I think AIDS might have put me off meeting people after an initial situation at the start of university. I just buried myself in Sutton Park, but I'm sure some of the sort of, it's just, even, and we're talking about the early 90s still being sort of,
oh yeah. I'm not sure
I'm going to go there. I'm just going to make silly videos for the next 8 years. But I think that's something that youngsters today would even think about.
I don't know there though.
But, I did once go on. I had a friend who Nick knows called Andrew. I know so many Andrews, but Andrew Reid, who's been on the show once. If anyone remembers, he's the guy who lived in Berlin with his daughter, and we talked to him about 2 years ago. I'd like to get him back on the show, but he's always so busy. He was in Sutton Park. I'd say he was a bit of a reluctant actor. He was very good, very dry. And we had a great episode talking about Clearbury. We had a great episode where we went up to Clearbury, and it started to rain, and we got absolutely. It was in the summer. We got absolutely soaked, and the ad-libbing we did when we were soaking was when I watched it again recently. It made me chuckle. But I think in the sort of early noughties. Because he went a few times where he was living overseas, and then he'd be back for a bit, and he wanted to go sort of ghost hunting in certain places in Wales where his family lived that were known for sort of spooky sightings or whatever. The only trouble was, I don't think he was working at the time, whereas I was. So by the time I got down. The weekend was a sort of. I like to do things at weekends, but I'm not so sure I wanted to be sitting in a field at 3 o'clock in the morning on the off chance that a ghost might pop by. But and I think I even put my foot down and said, I'm not getting up. We stayed in a hotel, and we went. And during the day, we went to a few sort of spooky castles, and I feel that this was like the early noughties because I still had my video camera, but I was beginning to lose interest in. But I did video things. But when it came to I'm not getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and sit in the field on the off chance. So this was January or February as well. It wasn't the summer. It wouldn't have been nice. So I felt a bit bad that I'd kind of chickened out of. I hadn't really chickened out. I just kind of like I want some sleep because I've got to go back to work on Monday, and so like the sort of the reality of ghost hunting sounds all very, very good fun, but
if only you could ghost hunt at noon.
Yeah. Well, I always like the idea. There's I don't even know that people in the States will know about this character, but there was a very famous character in the 50s known as called Quatermass. It was a TV series, and you may be aware of it because Hammer did their versions of Quatermass films.
Well, actually, Martin did a feature, and that's where I know it from. Otherwise, I never would have heard about it.
And Hammer did there were only three TV series, but the third one, Quatermass in the Pit, was made in the 60s and is the only colour one. But the writer of Quatermass did a one-off play called The Stone Tape in the 70s, and that looked at the theory of how if a person sort of walks around a building, the building almost records that, like it becomes like the stone becomes like a tape that records, and that's what a ghost is. It's
easily my favourite Nigel Neal thing, the Stone Tape. I love it.
I just like that idea that so I always kind of theorise that maybe there'll be a ghost of me at that college I worked in for so many years because I just walked those stairs so many times, and it's a theory that I believe it, but it intrigues me, interests me, and I can see how there's quite a lot of mileage in sort of exploring that.
What do you guys think of the crop of modern ghost hunting shows, if you watch them at all? And I confess I've seen very few of them, but what I have seen is they're just completely unconvincing and a little ridiculous.
I watch very, very, very little modern TV anyway, and I don't think I would be all that interested in it. I like the idea of ghost stories very much, but my only connection other than that would be my brother-in-law, one of the 50% of brothers-in-law it's persona non grata with, has shares in a ghost hunting sort of, like ghost toury kind of business. I remember we went up to Bodmin. I dragged them up to Bodmin because I have an ex-girlfriend there, and whilst they were there, they explored the jail, which has several ghost stories in it. And they've bought a place where they've got a caravan or something in Bodmin, and they actually apparently they do run ghost tours.
A friend of mine, I didn't realise. I'd forgotten that he was so interested in that sort of thing. He took part in something like you were describing, except that it was on YouTube the other weekend, and he was one of, I think, 3 or 4 different people who the presenters kind of allowed to try and bring the ghost forward or talk to the ghost. I must admit I didn't watch it like minute for minute, but I think my friend had a particular method based on some sort of area of expertise that he follows, but a lot of it was somebody sitting in a corridor calling out or trying to talk. I don't know I don't know that I haven't spoken to him yet to ask whether he did feel that he'd achieved something or whether it was just an interesting experience to go through. Because it was, very much like the sort of things you see on TV, except I guess it wasn't a paid-for show, and it probably went on for a lot more longer than a lot of those shows would, being that it was on YouTube. I think they were broadcasting all night.
And whilst I think of it, two more things about ghosts. One is, on my first marital home, St Martin's Church Street, my wife can be a little bit fanciful in her anecdotes, but there were several sightings of a figure walking across our living room, and I don't think she was the only one that actually saw it. I think I might have called a glimpse myself, not to describe it or think it was a ghost or whatever, but there was a few other sightings of a figure walking across our living room. So that was probably the nearest we've come in well, I say recent years, we're talking about 20 years ago, but and the other thing is there's a place in town which is now a block of flats, which was used to be the hospital, the main city infirmary. It's still got it's outside, but it was a real old-fashioned hospital, and my late mother-in-law was a nurse there, and several people have seen a ghost they call the Grey Lady, and she apparently, I think, was a mother whose either a mother whose child had died and she was looking for her, or a nurse who was looking after that child. I can't remember which way round it is, but several people have spotted the Grey Lady over the years, and I think they got in a priest to try and exorcise her, but she's come, according to the local ghost hunters, she's actually come back, and of course it's not an infirmary now, it's a hospital. But I would have, having gone into hospital admin in my 30s, I would have liked to have gone in my 20s whilst the infirmary was still there, and sort of worked in this place, which was a little bit more old-fashioned and potentially haunted. But the Grey Lady is quite a famous one. There's also where Debenhams was, in the centre of town, there was a person that was executed, I think, who's supposedly people have seen the ghost of that person upstairs in what was Debenhams. But that's another one. So Salisbury's got its fair share of ghosties.
I bet.
Well, I think we're nearly running out of time. I've got a couple of questions for both Toppy and Nick after we run the theme music, so we may have a little bit more to say. But anyway, I just want to say thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much, Toppy, for being here, and
always a pleasure.
Always good to talk about these spooky things.
Yes.
I mean, because before I just suddenly remembered our friend Elaine. She has quite a few experiences of having seen, certainly back when we first knew her. But I think we've discussed this on the show before. So
I have at least two very close friends who claim to be sort of mediumistic, not be able to contact ghosts, but be able to be aware of them. And it's odd because one of them, a very, very old school friend of mine, and I've walked through a churchyard in the dark with her before, and she sort of, if someone's put on a light, or if I'd put on a light, she said to me that they don't like the light on them. So she's perfect. They're both tough cookies. They're nobody's fool. They've grown up in very tough. And they've brought up several kids, and they're not fanciful people. And we went into the Haunch of Venison, which was the most, I suppose, the most haunted pub. There's a local historian called Frog Moody that has written books and writes articles, and he does ghost tours. And he and his wife come along, and they came into the pub whilst we were there. And she suddenly turned to me and said, they like her, but they're not quite sure what to make of him. So I never quite know where these claims come from, but I never laugh, I never make fun, and I never scoff, and I just go with the flow, and I find it interesting that where these things come from.
Ghost tours can be great fun. I've been to one in Dublin, and I've been to quite a few in York because I went. I think York's quite. I think there's rival ghost tours in York, and I went through a stage of going there quite a lot. And they're real like street theatre, and they even have some because York's full of these little stickleways between streets, and they even set it up where somebody jumps out at you and it gives you they're telling the stories, and then you get a jump scare that kind of makes you feel even more in the mood. And I was always interested because there's ghost stories in York of like soldiers being seen, but they only seem to be ghosts from the knees upwards, and the reason behind this I believe was because the streets were much lower, like 500 years ago or whatever, so that it might explain why you're not seeing the full ghost, because the streets are, I mean, not that I saw them, but the stories of the sightings are sort of slightly skewed because of the geography of the town has changed since. Whether it be true or not, it's a nice little detail that kind of makes you think. But anyway, right, we should say goodbye. We as I say, I do have a couple of questions to finish with, but anyway, thank you very much, Toppy. Thank you very much, Nick, and I'm sure we'll be back again soon.
All right, great to be back.
Yeah, yes.
Bye for now.
Oh.
So my two questions. The first one would be, if you were going to watch something that if you felt I need a bit of TV or a scary film, what would your go-to be? What would you pick from the shelves if we were going to sit down and watch something now?
For me, I'd want something new that I'd have hopes, would give me the chills. But I can tell you one that it's kind of a go-to because it does feel genuinely scary to me, more so than a lot of things, and just seems to have kept its scariness in my mind. And that's a TV movie. It was a miniseries, actually, they made of Salem's Lot.
Oh, yeah.
With David Soul and James Mason. Well, whatever it is, the nice little chills and scariness about that has stayed with me, and that would be an example of a go-to for me.
Yeah, I like that. I like one of the films that I kind of, it's not so much spooky, it's more of the sort of, I suppose, the slasher variety. I always watch Black Christmas from 1974 around Christmas time because it's got into a real habit over the last 10-15 years of watching it. There's been quite a few remakes since the original, but the original is by far the best. And
is that the one with Margot Kidder?
Yeah, she's absolutely amazing in that film. That scene where she's at the party and she's feeding, supposed to be looking after the kids, and she's feeding one like brandy or something. she's talking to somebody else, and she's kind of like, "Oh, here I have this." But it's kind of, it's also kind of a weird film because the ending is kind of a little bit ambiguous, and quite a lot ambiguous, and you don't it's a nice, chilly, scary in a non supernatural way.
I can also say my last cinematic scary experience was absolutely Aliens, where I was genuinely, transfixed with quite a bit of fear, and that's pretty rare for me to be drawn in and be on the edge of your seat like that, and that's the last cinematic experience I can remember.
And what about you, Nick?
I think a little bits and bobs, really. Film-wise, Crucible of Terror, I think, is a nice, my kind of low-budget, the 70s chiller. It's got some nice, creepy moments. TV-wise, Sapphire and Steel Stories 2 and 4, very creepy. If I was really going for some all-out chills. Doctor Who-wise, quite a number of Hinchcliffe episodes, Planet of Evil, which scared the out of me when I was a kid, and Android Invasion, funnily enough, I always found that creepy, but also part 1 of Earthshock, which the Pete Davidson story, which is very dark and helped by the music, and part 1 of Terminus, which is also a favourite of mine. That's
why I often say that Doctor Who is what got me into horror. I mean, a lot of horror people I hear on podcasts talking about liking horror. They got into horror because their bigger brother or whatever had a video and they watched it all. Yes. Whereas I think there was enough in Doctor Who, and I love the cliffhangers. There's enough to get me interested in scary moments. That Doctor Who is definitely my training ground for horror film.
A friend of ours who, I've known him for about 43 years. He was my writing partner for many years. Joe Bunsell. He's a big horror fan, and he's what Paul was just saying about the big brother getting into it. His big brother was certainly the one who got him into. In the 80s, there was these double bill horrors on BBC Two. And which his brother would tape, and then they'd watch usually on a very sunny Sunday afternoon with the curtains drawn, and he got very much into horror through that. Seeds of Doom with the which is basically Toppy, a remake of the Thing from Another World or The Thing, except that it goes beyond that because it starts off for 2 episodes set in the tundra. But then after 2 episodes, it was sort of resolves itself, except for that one of the seed pods has been taken back to Britain, and then the next 4 parts is them trying to stop that pod hatching and causing the same sort of more havoc than it would have done. That's another one that scared me as a kid, I must admit.
And I didn't even see it at the time. I was just fascinated when I did finally see it. And another one, Image of the Fendal, is also very hammery, and there's nothing about that sometimes Doctor Who gets accused of being childish, but you could watch that and you'd never.
It's a super story.
Yeah. But anyway, I've got another question for you, but I can hear the theme music coming, so we'll be back in a moment.
Goodbye, 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 goodbye.
It's been good, but yeah, definitely time to come home now.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear, what's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Let's go. I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
So, yes, my other question is there any sort of scary film or TV show or something that you think is very overrated that people always go on about and you think it's not scary, or it doesn't even have to be a specific thing, it could be a genre that you think, it's overrated, doesn't do the job. I think for me, it's more those sort of films that have been out in the last, the ghosty films, the low budget CGI sort of ghosty films that sometimes they're done like Blair Witch was done in that they're handheld sort of, but and they really, or they really don't. There's so many of them, and they fill up Netflix, and you think I want something actually. Why don't they put more old horror films on here? I don't want to watch Supernatural Phenomenon 12 or something. But Nick, Toppy, what about you?
Do you want to go first, Toppy?
No, go ahead.
Okay. X-Files, for me. I never liked X-Files. I couldn't get on with the leads. I couldn't get on with the stories. I just found it a turgid, sort of, just messy. When it was, they'd be looking at some horribly mutilated body, and I just thought it chunted along. I never really got on with it.
I think I had more problems with the style. You'd have a very serious episode, and maybe this was more as the show went on. You'd suddenly have, and then the next episode, they try and play one for laughs, and it's sometimes be very difficult to get your head from what they were doing last week to what they're doing this week. And I know it's nice to have variety, but it was generally. I mean, and they do that. They've done that in Doctor Who, where they've had, but Doctor Who is always a little bit more lighter of touch, whereas X-Files could get very dark. And then next week you've got a very silly episode. That was too much of a jump for me, but.
One example I can think of is, you don't hear much about it anymore, but there was a while 3 or 4 years ago where American Horror Story was all the rage. And I was pretty late to the party, and when I finally did see it, I nonplussed about it. I just, okay, everybody loved the hell out of this, and I'm just not getting into it. I don't know. So American Horror Story would be a good example for me. We're like, okay.
It's funny you said. I was actually going to mention American Horror Story had you not. So I'm glad you mentioned it. For me, it's very hit and miss, and there's some seasons that have been I really liked, and then some. In fact, the first season, I bought a box set when it was new. I think I had a box set with the first 2 seasons, and I disliked the first season so much. So did a friend who was watching with me. That I was almost like, I don't think I even want to bother watching the second season. But there have been some seasons I've liked. There's also been some seasons where they seem to have a 10-episode, time slot, and yet the plot runs out after 6 episodes, and they're stretching out the story to try and fill. What they seem to have done with the most recent series is, rather than do that, they actually did a 6-parter and a 4-parter under their 10-episode, which was a lot better, because then you didn't have all the filler, and you just got on with a new story, which was preferable to having to watch. And I think a few times they may have even gone, no, we can't get 10 episodes out of this, because there was 1 or 2 seasons that were only 9 episodes, which is a very odd number. You can imagine they probably went, no, we can't get to 10. We have to finish it at 9. But so to me, like you say, very. There are 1 or 2 seasons I really like, but mostly I'm quite nonplussed by it as well. I don't quite understand the appeal.
I have thought of something contemporary that was effective for me, and it was The Haunting of Bly Manor. And for whatever reason, that got me.
I just sometimes think that they allow themselves too many episodes and too much room to sort of. or there's also this thing where there's one or two. There's this series the BBC have done on and off, quite a lot of it off. But in the 70s, it was almost every year they did Ghost Story for Christmas, and it was they're often based on M.R. James stories, and the 70s versions are very like the half an hour. They're very because they're very effectively done. They haven't got a big budget for special effects. It's just like a glimpse of something or a hand or whatever. But they tried to remake some of them, and one of them was made in black and white, so that might have been why they thought, oh, we should do a colour version. And it had John Hurt in it, so, great. You got a great cast. But whoever it was, the writer thought that they needed to add some element of their own, which wasn't in the story. Yeah. Something to do with an old people's home. It wasn't in the original story, and it ruined it, and it dragged it out, and it tried and made it more sort of like soppy, and there's been a few more recent ones where they've tried to add things, and I don't always know the stories well enough, but Toby, last year they did one, and Toby was like, well, they've added this character, they've changed that, the ending's this, that's not how this isn't an adaptation of this is some, based on a story, you could say, but some contemporary writers taking a story and thinking that they have the right to somehow make it a bit their own, and M.R. James, love, why do you think you've got this writers write stories? They're structured, and you start picking bits out. Yeah. They start to collapse.
I prefer the more subtle horror stories or ghost stories, like M.R. James, Ghost Stories for Christmas, and the Stone Tape. But also, you were talking about fake go-to scary ones. Children's series in the 70s had a cracking amount of good scary moments. There's one called Children of the Stones, which is set by a stone circle, and the music alone still chills me to the bone, even 45 years on. So that's a good one. And also, there's an anthology series called Shadows, and that's got some cracking episodes in it as well. Some of them are just mysterious, some of them are creepy, some of them, I remember a lot of them from when they first went out. So, yeah, that'd be another example of the good ones. I know we've moved on to bad things.
That's perfectly normal on the Shy Life podcast. Perfectly normal.
Sometimes I just really wonder about the show. I really do. Yeah. Oh, kitty dearie. Kitty. Oh, I love Dee. Man, was that worth it or not? Oh my goodness, that was a darling little shoe.
584.
This is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard.